Hi guys, today I'll be taking a look at a viewer suggested tactile switch, the Outemu Purple. Let's get started. Now, the Outemu Purple is described to be, quote, an improved version of the Outemu Brown switch, end quote. But, as you will learn later, it's really not that great of a switch. Additionally, the Outemu Purple is not to be confused with the Outemu Ice Purple, which are Zelio clones. The easiest way to tell them apart is by looking at the housing. The Ice Purples have a clear housing all around, but the regular Purples, which is the one I have white bottom housings. Now, in terms of pricing, these currently go for around £4.60 for 10 switches on AliExpress, placing them firmly in the mid-tier category. And this is what they look like when disassembled. Feel free to pause the video. Now, let's move on to the switch categories. On-center key presses are very smooth with only minimal hints of scratchiness. However, off-center key presses are very scratchy. It reminds me of the Cherry MY switch, but it's not as bad as that, it just reminds me of it. Overall, these are very average, 5 out of 10. The weighting is light with a slight pre-travel before the non-existent tactile bump, and it's described to actuate at 50 grams. It doesn't feel anything special, and I assume these have the full 4mm of travel like the Outemu Brown. Now, with that said, these at least perform more consistently compared to most MX clones, which is great for predictability, but everything else feels off. In fact, these feel ever so slightly less tactile than the Outemu Brown, which, if you're not aware of, wasn't a very tactile switch to begin with. Overall, I really don't see the point of these switches. They aren't bad per se, but they aren't exactly an upgrade to MX clones either, unless you have a really bad sample of them. 6 out of 10. Now, sound is quite tinny and hollow compared to most switches in its segment. Not sure why, to be honest, but it does make the switches sound cheap. 5 out of 10. Now, take a listen and enjoy. Now, as a tactile switch, it's very lacking in the tactile department. Let me explain. Firstly, before I get berated for this, they do describe this switch as a weakened Outemu Brown, which explains the lack of tactility. However, I'm not 100% convinced that this, quote, enables balanced writing, because I can tell you that reducing tactility in an already not very tactile switch doesn't make for balanced writing. All it does is it makes this feel like a failed linear switch design, which in reality is what this feels like. And yes, this is by far the weakest aspect of this switch. Moreover, these are also not the smoothest to type with, but this isn't as big of an issue, just thought I'd mention it for those who care. Overall, you may think these are terrible switches, but they actually aren't too bad as long as you come in with lower expectations. 5 out of 10. Now, gaming with basically a linear switch at this point is pretty decent, not surprising there. In fact, in many fast-paced games, it's very usable as it wasn't too scratchy to completely affect your gameplay. Although with that said, if you're the type to heavily rely on tactility when gaming, then I can't recommend this to you since it won't provide you with sufficient feedback. It just wasn't designed for that, unfortunately. Overall, from a smoothness and consistency standpoint, I can see this being an alternative to the MX Brown and MX clones, but that's about it. Don't expect anything else out of this thing. 6 out of 10. In conclusion, I see these switches more as alternatives rather than straight upgrades unless you find them for a good price. But remember, these aren't as common as MX clones, so finding a good deal on these could be tough. The final score for this switch is 27 out of 50 or 54%, nothing special. Anyway, next time I'll be looking at a unique tactile switch. Until then, take care and goodbye.